And we're live.
Good afternoon, fellow directors, those watching at home. I'd just like to acknowledge our gathering today virtually in various territories of the Coast Salish people. Welcome to today's event. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item of business is approval of the agenda.
That's moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. You'll have to bear with me. I've just had major dental surgery and I'm having problems speaking, as you may have noticed. So bear with me if you will. Next, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On to public input period, and we have one submission. This submission is from Susan Kaufman. Dear Chair, it is admirable that this committee and ultimately the board wish to maintain as close to 0% budget increase as possible, but there is also a cost of doing so. The COVID-19 pandemic has created fiscal challenges for some, but not all within our community, and it is the responsibility of local governments to ensure funding is available to provide necessary means to the core services while maintaining reasonable financial support to the various services and functions that keep our communities functioning at appropriate levels. Grant funding provided by the provincial government highlights the expectation of how those funds will be allocated and what the province identifies as core priorities for local government. Among those expectations, bylaw enforcement, presumably a more active role in ensuring public health orders are being followed, computer and other electronic technology costs to improve interconnectivity and virtual communications, addressing revenue shortfalls, facility reopening and operating costs, communication considerations. If the board is truly interested in hearing from the community, it must provide the appropriate priority and funding to facilitate meaningful engagement and open the virtual doors to the public. Please keep these thoughts in mind while you undertake your deliberations today. Signed, Susan Kaufman, and that is all there is for public input today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Legault. I think we did miss the adoption of the minutes of August 14th, did we?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I think you might mean we missed the adoption of the agenda.
I see number 2, adoption of minutes.
That's not what I see.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Legault, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Because it's a special meeting, there's no minutes to adopt. So there's no delegations, correspondence, or information items, so we're on to reports. And item R1 is a report from the Finance Division regarding the draft 2021 budget overview, and the recommendation is for information.
Thank you very much. I will look for a speakers list. Anyone? Ms. Soldera?
So I do have a presentation to share with the committee today regarding the release of the 2021 draft budget on our website. If I may share my screen and go through the presentation. There we go. I apologize, my keyboard has taken a rest. There we go. So as you're all aware, the CVRD has 4 municipalities and 9 electoral areas. For 2021 budget, we have 178 services that we're budgeting for. So most of our functions are funded through requisition. Requisition represented almost 43% of the total budget of the total revenue for 2020. For most of our services, taxation is allocated based on assessed values. Each member municipality and electoral area's share is calculated based on assessed values that are provided by BC Assessment. And within this, the distribution between the property classes is determined using a fixed ratio that's mandated under provincial legislation. Funding for each service is determined by the establishment bylaw for that service. And with so many services, there are a wide variety of funding mixes that we use. We can, however, broadly categorize the main types of services as regional, electoral area, sub-regional, and specified area. Regional services are funded based on assessment for all 13 jurisdictions within the regional district and are typically services that benefit the entire region, such as solid waste management or general government. For 2020, the requisition for regional services totaled just over $14.3 million. This is proposed to increase to almost $15 million in 2021 as a result of increases in the solid waste function. Electoral area services are specific to the rural areas only and are therefore shared by all participating electoral areas on an assessment basis with no municipal funding participation. An example of this would be community planning, where the CVRD performs the function for the electoral areas, but not in the municipalities. The X on the chart indicates that the entire area participates, and the O shows where it's just a portion of the electoral area. For 2020, almost $11 million was requisitioned for electoral area services. For 2021, the proposed budget before supplemental requests shows a reduction in this amount to approximately $10.8 million. In some cases, staff have reduced the core budget and put forward supplemental requests that, if approved, would result in a 0% requisition increase. The Electoral Area Services Committee will consider these supplemental requests later this month. For sub-regional services, many of our services are sub-regional in nature in that they provide a service for certain areas within the CVRD and the funding is shared by those participating areas, normally on an assessment basis. An example would be Kerry Park Recreation, which is funded by the partners in the South End. The 2020 budget included $14.8 million in requisition for sub-regional services, and the 2021 proposed budget currently shows $15.1 million, primarily due to increases in the transit functions that are included in this grouping. For specified area services, they're set up to fund services that are provided just to a number of properties that do not represent the entire electoral area and are different in that these functions are established in response to petitions by property owners in a lot of cases. A service area that will be established to encompass the properties that will receive the service, such as our fire services. So while taxation is the major component of our revenue base, we have a few other revenue streams. Non-taxation revenue streams that are considered as part of our budget process include the user fees and charges used for curbside and pickup and utilities a lot, permits and licensing fees, reserve funds where we accumulate our operating reserves to protect against variances and unexpected expenditures from year to year, and our capital reserves for our long-term assets and asset management needs. Grants, and where it's possible, we fund projects through the use of grant funding, and the proceeds of borrowing, which can only be used for capital purposes. In recent years, we've taken advantage of this a fair amount with respect to the low interest rates that we've had available to us. So as mentioned, services funded with other revenue sources include the community health network, the municipal MFA debt, curbside recycling and garbage services, sewer and water services, and some of our street lighting and drainage services. Our current budget approach is incremental. This means that the current activities and staffing levels are considered as core and are used as the baseline for the upcoming budget. The approach uses the core expenditures as the basis for the preparation of the draft budget, and requests to changes to existing service levels are treated as supplemental requests and taken to committees and commissions for their consideration. Core expenditures are defined as those that are required to maintain current levels of staffing, services, and capital, including reallocations of resources within the operational budgets that do not require an increase to taxation. Supplemental requests for the purposes of budgeting are defined as items that are additions to current staffing and/or service levels, and any capital that requires an increase to requisition or user fees. This includes purchases or construction of new capital, Also, the addition of full or part-time staffing positions and changes to programs or services that require increases to user fees or to requisition. Staff was directed to target a 0% requisition increase for 2021. In some services, such as transit, solid waste, and Vancouver Island Regional Library, this was not possible due to existing service contracts. And the committee and then later the board provided an exemption from this mandate for those services. Any increases above a 0%, other than those that were provided with an exemption, would require a business case to be presented to the board. So the core budget for 2021 as presented includes an increase right now of 1.85%. And this is primarily from proposed increases in the transit and solid waste functions, which is offset by decreases in some of the other functions. Later in today's meeting is a report regarding the business cases that are being put forward for 2021, as well as a report including a listing of all the supplemental requests for 2021. Should all of the business cases and all of the supplemental requests be approved, the total requisition increase for 2021 at this time would be 3.11%. The increase to requisition is discussed as a total number. However, the effects on individual properties varies based on a number of factors, including the assessment of the property and the location of the property. Only the participants in a service area contribute to the cost of providing those services. So this slide shows the impact on each municipality and electoral area of the proposed 2021 budget, as well as the impact if all the supplemental requests and business cases were approved. So looking at our budget activities for the year so far, the board provided direction to staff on the 2021 budget. The department submitted their information, which was reviewed by finance, and then the senior management team who reviewed and ranked all of the requests. The draft budget was released on the website on Friday, and we're presenting it to you today. We will be setting up virtual public meetings in the near future and starting to present the budgets to commissions and committees later this month, including this time next week. Just today, you would have gotten an email from Legislative Services with respect to the November 25th date, which I think we're going to put off until December 9th to help address some of the other priorities for that day. So that will be in the December 9th meeting. And then near the end of January, we'll do a final review of the whole budget and hopefully adopt the financial plan in early February. So our budget has a number of detailed schedules available on our website that provide total budget information as well as detailed financial information on each of our services. The majority of the schedules look at changes in property taxation, and parcel tax information is provided in separate schedules. So Schedule A represents the changes in tax requisition. It only shows services that have a change. So just because a service isn't mentioned doesn't mean it's not included in the budget, just there's no change to that service for the year. So it details the amount of the change for that service. And then down at the very bottom of that schedule is the total difference between the general tax requisition for 2020 and that for 2021. This does not include the change in the local area service taxes, which only affect the specifically defined areas. Schedule B shows the change in tax requisition by jurisdiction. The change due to other jurisdiction column shows the change in the library requisition for the year. Also down at the bottom, you can see the increase in the local service area taxes, such as the fire service taxes. And Schedule C shows the change in requisition going all the way back to 2014. Schedule D on our website has a different page for each jurisdiction. This one here it's probably small for you to see, but it's for electoral area A. And so this lists the service that that particular area participates in and shows the changes for that service. And down at the bottom, it includes the local service area taxes that are applicable to properties in that jurisdiction and the changes in those as well. Schedule E graphically represents this, also with a page for each jurisdiction, and shows the impact on an average home in that area. Schedule F is a summary of short and long-term debt And you will see that the schedule on our website has not been updated for 2020 yet because 2020 is not yet over. We haven't finished all of our projects or all of our borrowing for the year. So it's still reflective as at December 31st, 2019. It will be updated near the end of December after all of our short-term borrowing and long-term debt is done. And similar to Schedule F, Schedule G has not yet been updated for 2020. There are a number of projects which are not complete, and we don't usually transfer funds to the capital reserve until the end of the year. So this schedule will be updated probably closer to mid-January when year-end funding transactions are nearing completion. So Schedule G has a portion for operating and a portion for capital. And so the operating reserve schedule, again, has not yet been updated and will be done closer to the end of the year when we know how much operating reserve we might need to use to cover deficits and that sort of thing. Schedule H shows assessment by jurisdiction for the last 3 years. Now you'll notice that it's still 2020 again. That's because the 2021 completed roll is not released by BC Assessment until December 31st. So all of the calculations included in the draft budget thus far are based on the 2020 revised roll. Schedule I shows how the requisition for each area is broken down between the property classes. And Schedule J shows the cost for a $100,000 home and the portion of the total assessment that's represented by each area. Parcel taxes for our sewer and water systems are shown on Schedule K. As parcel taxes are not included in the requisition percentage that was expressed earlier, staff have included the potential increases in these initial budget presentations. So that number is the number if all business case items were approved. They've already been included in these budgets. The business cases will be presented to Electoral Services Committee later this month. And should they all be approved, as I mentioned, the total increase would be 4.15%. User fees are also for sewer and water, and they've also been included in the committee's information and are part of the business case reports that will be presented in November. So it's important to note that an increase to the parcel tax or a user fee does not necessarily mean an increase to the property owner. So in many cases, new properties have been added to service areas. Thus, it increases the total amount that we can collect without increasing the cost to individual properties or individual property owners. And so those are our detailed budget schedules available on the website. We also have more specific detail on individual services. Every service has a summary sheet. It gives a brief description of the service, lists the total amount being requisitioned for 2021, sets the maximum amount that may be requisitioned if applicable, and shows the split between the participating areas. This is then followed by a proposed 5-year plan for that particular function. And then there is the detailed accounting software showing the actual for 2018 and 2019, the 2020 budget numbers, and the 2021 draft budget. So all of this is available on our website so that we can provide as much information as possible to you and to the taxpayers who want to know what we're considering. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Soldera. Very good presentation. Director Salmon, I saw your hand.
Yes, thank you. That was good. Just so a general question. So you mentioned requisition is, I think, 42% of our overall budget. And that's currently about 1.8% increase. But just curious, what about some of the bigger, what percent increase have we got on grants, say, this year? How much is that budget change?
We don't typically budget for grant funding unless we have a grant approved. And so I haven't done the complete calculations on approved grants thus far for the year. So I can report back to you at the next meeting, but I can't answer that question.
Okay. And what portion of that overall budget is grants, roughly? Is it 20% or? Okay, wait for that one too.
I'll give it a quick glance and I will report back momentarily.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I have Director Acton and Stone. Did I miss anyone else? Sebring, I'll go to Director Acton, please.
Thank you. Two items. I always struggle with this library function. As I recognize the library is a valuable asset and it's used a lot by the community, but they, in my opinion, have had the worst COVID behavior. It is hardly open, hardly available for picking up books. I can't see how they have a budget that's gone up. That to me is like, I don't understand why we can't question the library. And they're operating at maybe 10% of what they were last year. So it's really, I'm struggling with that one. And then I think as a board, maybe revisiting the solid waste budget might be useful at $15 per 100,000, just an increase. I think that is quite a lot that perhaps we should be using that increase somewhere else. And that's just my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Acton. I have Director Stone next.
Yeah, I'll wait for the further reports on transit, but I will say that I have some sticker shock with both commuter transit and regular transit. I think the percentage increases to the municipal partners is quite shocking across the board, but obviously as we get deeper into it, we'll discuss those individual items. But even though I expected an increase in those three functions, solid waste and both transit functions, I think it's quite shocking.
Thank you. Director Sebring, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Talitha, for a very comprehensive report. I was just digging through the schedules on the website. I actually started looking earlier because I've been there before and I get it now. When I look at the Schedule E, cost for the average home in each electoral area and the various municipalities, I note that the increase for the north end of North Cowichan is 5.55%, which is well beyond the zero that we'd all envisioned. And for the south end is 2.82, which is a little more in line with everybody else. Can you explain to me why the north end is so much bigger? I mean, there's some breakout there for, I understand the arena and the theater and some stuff that people north of Maze Road pay for that folks south of Maze Road don't. But how come there's that huge discrepancy between the north and south end of North Cowichan?
Through the chair, I'm actually flipping through the schedules right now myself to see it's got to do with one of the services that is much more prevalent or that only the north end pays for.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. I mean, you know, commuter transit's up three. Maybe that's the difference. Well, hold on, that's the south end. Yeah, well, they're both up 3.66. Transit generally 5.47 and 11.52 for the solid waste complex, which is the same for both. So I don't get where that big increase is coming from.
So also part of the difference is the denominator that you use with respect to when you're doing the calculation. So it's based on an increase from the previous year. So your denominator number is smaller. The main differences in participant areas are with respect to the Cowichan Community Center, the Performing Arts Center, and Liquid Waste Management Plan, and Cowichan River Flood Management. I think the majority of the difference in this case is actually from the Performing Arts Center. So as we'll discuss in further detail later, in the Performing Arts Center, the north end participates in the main service, whereas the south end participates in the service that is split out according to a formula. And that actually ended up being a slight decrease of those services this year because we changed the assessment that we base the split on. So it's the split for last year was on the 2019 assessment, and the split for 2021 is based on the 2020 assessment. So it was a slight decrease in the south end.
I'm sorry, but I'm, you know, if we're going to start with 0 and we wind up at 5.5%, I got a problem. And I'm just saying that now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just remind you, if you're done speaking, to mute so we don't get the feedback. Do I have anyone else? Yes, Director Smith.
Thank you. I always find the budget interesting, and I love spending hours going through it and looking at all the details. So I thank you very much for putting it out so easily for us to look at and follow. One of my concerns is because I have the Gulf Islands and some of the budget items are specific to them. When I look at Schedule D and E, it's hard for them to actually see what they participate in and what they don't participate in. And I'm just wondering, I think we, at the last budget conversation with the public, there was sort of an indication by staff that you might be able to make some changes that would bring their information into some sort of document that also would help them as they look at this these documents. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Salmon. Again?
Yeah, thank you. I could probably comb through and figure this out, but just a parochial question. So I see Area A has about triple the increase of our neighboring Area B or Area D. Is there a short answer for what explains that?
And I see Miss Soldera intently looking at her screen, trying to get an answer for you. Yes.
Through the chair. So in a lot of cases, actually just flipping the main difference that I'm noticing from Area A to Area B is even with respect to community parks. So the community parks functions in Area B are showing a fair bit of a decrease, as well as in Area C, but there is no proposed decrease, or a much smaller decrease for Area A. So that is one of the differences.
Interesting, thank you.
And if I may, Chair, just with respect to the question about the grants, we don't actually have a specific, we don't report out in our financial plan just on grant funding. We lump it in with a bunch of other revenue sources. So I'd have to run a report from our accounting software and bring that back for further discussion by the board at a later date.
Thank you for clarifying that. I have Director Morrison next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Ms. Soldera. So I'm assuming some of the different numbers that I'm seeing in the different schedules are likely those changes that aren't readily apparent, in that when we were last considering the budget, it was on those incomplete numbers of assessment that we had before when we were doing the budget. And so when I look at some of the numbers today, I could be paying more due to an increase in assessment and overall assessment for my area on regional functions. And that could be where some of my increases are. And I'm sensing that's what's happening. In my case, I may be having forestry paying a little less in my area, and my residential taxpayers are paying a little bit more. But my question would be, is it appropriate for us to contact Ms. Soldera, after the meeting or before our next meeting, just to make sure that we've ironed out and have clear understanding of those? They're a little bit technical, but I like to know those differences. So would I be able to approach you offline and discuss those?
Through the chair, absolutely. I welcome questions from any directors with respect to their specific areas.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Morrison. Anyone else over here? Looking around. Thank you very much, Ms. Soldera. Appreciate that. Moving on, Mr. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R2 is a report from the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer regarding 2021 budget business cases, and the recommendation is for information.
Thank you very much. Mr. Carruthers, how are you today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, directors. So this is a new step that we've not employed in the past through our budget process in terms of presenting business cases over and above our supplemental requests. And this is in direct response to the board's mandate to attempt to maintain a 0% requisition increase. And the direction was that if there were any services within the organization that we were not able to achieve that 0%, that we would make a business case for those to cover off those potential increases. As Ms. Soldera referenced earlier, there were three functions in transit and solid waste that had come to the board previously with respect to contractual agreements or costs that we were not able to avoid in terms of the 0%. Staff have identified 8 additional services within the organization where maintaining a 0% requisition increase would have impact. So we've presented those in the form of business cases. And as you'll see in the report, that those business cases total a 0.41% increase if all of those business cases are to be approved by the board. And of course, as we go through the committee review of the various budgets, the directors will have an opportunity to delve deeper into those specific business cases. But that's the overview, and then I would defer to Ms. Soldera for any specific questions about those items specifically. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Carruthers. Yes, Director Marsh.
Yes, to you, to Ms. Soldera. I'm wondering if you could say more about function 106, the commuter transit increase of 57.85%.
Through the chair, absolutely. So transit will actually be on an agenda later today. I believe Mr. Wakeham is presenting some information to you at that time. And also it will be brought forward for more specific discussion by the committee on December 9th. At this time, I believe that Mr. Wakeham has been budgeting for reduced ridership due to COVID-19 and lack of people going down to Victoria quite as often. But with, at this time, no curtailment of service. I believe that that is part of the discussion that he will be having with the board in the very near future, as well as discussions with the Ministry of Transportation, I believe it is, with respect to potential funding for continuation of transit service for local governments for the future. So those very specific topics are going to be brought forward by Mr. Wakeham, as well as some potential options for the board's consideration with respect to this budget.
Thank you very much.
Follow up, are you okay, Ms. Director Marsh? Yes, Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just expanding on the explanation from Ms. Soldera, Mr. Wakeham presented this budget conservatively with what he knew at that particular time. As she's expressed, we are hopeful that there will be some offsetting revenues that come into this budget over the next couple months as we move our way through the budget process. So this is potentially the worst case scenario with some additional revenues forthcoming.
Thanks for the clarification. I have Director Wilson, then Director Acton. Anyone else while I'm looking? Director Nicholson after that. Director Wilson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. A question for staff here on the analysis part of this particular report, which I'm looking at, function 279, which says Parks and Trails 4.08% increase to maintain current service levels. Could you expand on what you actually mean by maintaining current service levels? What's going on here?
So through the chair, if I may, or I can defer to Mr. Carruthers if he wanted to take it. No. So the detailed business case is being presented to the Electoral Area Services Committee next week. And will be released on Friday. My understanding, this budget contains the mostly staffing salaries. And so I won't speak for the Parks Department, just to say that the detailed information is being presented, and they're seeking an increase in order to maintain the levels of staffing that are currently in existence. Then that might be a bit too brief of a summary, but as I say, that report will be available for your review as of Friday, as of tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Thank you, Talitha. That's great. Mr. Chair, for follow-up, please.
Absolutely.
Do you not think then in this particular case, and this is a question for the senior management, should this function 279 should not it say increase to maintain current staffing levels as opposed to service levels? This is a bit misleading to say the least.
Mr. Chair, if I can respond to that. Service levels and staffing levels are intricately aligned. And so I would welcome Director Wilson to have that conversation with us when we delve deeper into those specific budgets.
Thank you very much. And the final question is, and I'm sure this will be protected later, there is a sheet or two sheets in the next report with spreadsheets in there. I can't see function 279 mentioned anywhere in those. Seems to every other 28355 is in there except for 279. Why is it missing from those spreadsheets?
Soldera?
The attached spreadsheets with the next report are for supplemental requests. There are no supplemental requests for function 279.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have I missed anyone? Director Acton, you went off. Well, I'll go to Director Nicholson, please.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Carruthers about the business cases. What have you asked staff to provide to make their business cases? Are there particular things that you're going to be covering off?
Yeah, those will all be basically what it comes down to is the implications of not funding those increases. And so there could be a whole range of implications. Some of them are fixed costs that we can't avoid. Some of them would be potential loss or reduction in service levels in order to maintain that 0%. So there's a whole range. But essentially the staff are bringing forward to the board for their consideration the implications, whether they be service level reductions, integrity of our assets, public health and safety, those kinds of factors. And I welcome Ms. Soldera to add to that. Yeah.
Follow up, Director Nicholson? No follow up? Director Salmon, please. Director Salmon, you're muted if you are trying.
Oh, there we go.
There we are.
There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, just maybe I should have asked this in the overview part, but question. Is it possible to get wages separated out from all these functions as far as, you know, with our zero mandate, if we had zero increase, how much would that save on the requisition? Say zero increase for non-union, and I think we have a QP. Even throw that in. What would that implications be if we had zero for next year on that? Is that a thing that finance can do?
I think we're still committed to contracts throughout this next budget year, so that might be problematic. Just my.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. We do have collective agreements that we are required to honor.
But I certainly understand we're going Director Salmon.
Yeah, but I'm talking, first of all, management would be one. We don't have any agreement there. There's a question for Ms. Soldera, actually.
I think you did mention union, and I just wanted to clarify that we're obliged by some contractual obligations. But Ms. Soldera, if you will.
Through the chair, should the committee wish, we can probably do an overall wage amount. We don't actually separate out wages for union and non-union staff. And finance doesn't actually look after payroll. So it would be a fair bit of work to us for finance to separate them out, but should the committee wish, we can definitely look at doing it.
Follow up, yeah. Well, I think it'll be good. I appreciate it for this year in particular. I mean, with COVID, we've had lots of other government bodies taking zero. Some of our sister local and some provincial. So if we could have that, I think if we're ever going to do it this year with COVID and with our zero mandate, would be a year where we could look at what it would mean to the requisition.
Thank you very much. Do we need a motion for that, or just direction to staff, or
I just
consensus?
request to staff.
Okay, you'd like to direct staff to look at that? So taken. Anyone else speak to this? Yes.
I thought that something like this would require a motion. And if not, why not?
I mean, if it's direction to staff, Mr. Chair, and we've been told that it requires a fair bit of work, I'd hate to say one director suggested it, so let's just, make staff do it. And I'm not necessarily against what's being proposed by Area A, but just procedurally, I think it does require a motion.
Thank you for clarifying, and I think Director Salmon, you would be willing to put that forward as a motion?
Okay.
Do I have a seconder for that? Director Wilson? Do I have discussion on the motion?
Could you read, can you read what you've got, please?
I'm going to take a stab at that.
Please do.
That staff come up with a figure, assuming a 0% increase to non-union staff for next year. What would the impact be on the budget?
Okay, does that clarify, Director Acton? Okay, Director Marsh, you have a question on the motion, please? No? Director Toporowski.
Thank you. I was just echoing what our CAO mentioned about collective agreements. I don't know, that probably would be something that stays the same in our budgets. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. Like Director Salmon's motion is specific to exempt staff. Yeah. And just a reminder to the board that the current policy is that exempt staff, a majority of the exempt staff positions are based on the CPI for Victoria on an annual basis.
Okay, I have a list of Director Marsh and then Director Smith. Director Marsh, please.
Yes, I really appreciate the thoroughness of Director Salmon's wishes to find out, but I actually believe that COVID caused our staff to work a lot harder than normal, so and put themselves sometimes at greater risk. And I wonder, I do have a question through you to Ms. Soldera, if non-union staff receive benefits.
Through the chair, yes, non-union staff are benefited.
Okay, thank you. You know, I don't think I'd be supporting this motion, but I do understand the rationale. The reason being, I think staff are busier enough, busier than any other year probably. And yeah, I just think that to consider, which this seems to imply, not giving an increase to non-union people, but giving an interest to union people, I just think that it just feels like bad form to me.
Okay, thank you, Director Marsh. Director Smith, you're next.
Thank you. I'm looking for a bit of clarification. This function is only participants in it are only electoral area taxpayers. And I see that in that function. So the municipalities don't participate in this function. and we have union staff that have union agreements. We have non-union that have CPI annual based on Victoria. Now, if we actually agreed to that for the next year as a group, as the board, have we authorized that to follow it for 2021 for the non-union? Can you please clarify that, please?
Yes, Ms. Weiner.
Through the chair to Director Smith, currently right now there's, for the non-union, the minority of the non-union staff are through the CPI, which is the Victoria CPI, and the majority of them are matching the QP agreement. That's as per policy right now. So that's what the budget is developed based on at this point in time, and that goes for all functions. So I don't know necessarily exactly which function you're looking at.
Follow up, Director Smith.
I was just looking at the direction that Director Salmon was asking at one point about the breakdown of the union wages and the non-union wages in this function, so that it would be, that was what I had understood earlier that he was asking. And I was just wanting clarification on the CPI annual based on the Victoria. But I was wondering when that agreement that the board agreed to ends. Can you clarify that, please?
Mr. Chair, I can take that. That's a board policy, so there's no agreement per se with respect. The board passed a policy a number of years ago that defined how exempt staff salaries would be, increases would be determined. And as Ms. Weiner said, we have a number of our staff who are in the division manager, general manager level up that are tied to CPI, and the balance of the exempt staff are tied to the collective agreements. And that was a board policy developed a number of years ago.
Director Acton next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How I see it right now, we're just approving the idea of having the conversation. So I support it in concept to have the conversation. By supporting today doesn't necessarily mean I'm in support of putting people's salaries increases to zero. But what I think we do have an obligation here. I know countless people who both both partners have lost 100% of their income. I know some people who've lost 30% of their income because they came together as an organization, and that's what they decided in order to not lay people off. These are real, people have been truly affected and continue to be affected. Huge industries are completely wiped out. I have friends who are event coordinators. They're in the hospitality industry, hotel industry, and there's nothing for them. They're searching to get retrained, and people, I think we owe it to people to at least just have the conversation and see what we're looking at here and see what makes sense. So I will be approving this motion in concept of having the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Acton. I have Director Marsh and then Director Wilson. Anyone else while I'm looking? Director Sebring, I had you first, so I'll let you go first. I'm sorry. Director Sebring, Marsh, then Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really appreciate what we just heard from Shauna, and having the conversation, I think is a legitimate term. I don't know that at the end of the day I would support or not. A couple of things, just I guess one of them is point of clarification to what we heard from Director Smith about all of this lines up for electoral areas only. I don't believe that's true. I think the senior managers like the CAO come out of general government, and all of us pay for that. So, and that's, you know, and some of those are the biggest salaries, and so there's definitely an impact on us as municipal partners as well. I guess my other concern with this motion is how it affects, for lack of a better word, the elephant in the room, which is staff morale. If we end up, you know, even discussing this can create a perception that among the staff, and I take what Director Marsh said earlier to heart. I don't think staff at the municipal and local government levels have worked harder ever than they have in the last 8 months because of COVID. And to then, especially some of our senior people, and then just to dump this and say, yeah, but you know what, we're going to freeze your wages. And I line that up with what Director Acton says, that, you know what, in the private sector is happening too. And so, yeah, I want to have the discussion. I don't want to demoralize staff by having the discussion. You know, it's a balance, and I just sort of wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Mr. Carruthers would like to respond to that.
Yeah, I don't profess to speak for all of the staff, but I don't think any of our staff would be surprised that you would have that conversation in the current climate that we're in. And so certainly from your senior managers, it would not be at all a surprise and would be somewhat expected that you may have that conversation. So I wouldn't.
That gives me some. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And I think given the direction that the board gave earlier on zero, that would most certainly make sense. Director Marsh, I have you next.
Yeah, I'm feeling foolish because when I heard non-union, I wasn't thinking of the staff that have been holding the district together with the glue of their time and their time away from their families. So, and the considerable stress that being responsible for, I don't know how many staff there are altogether, but in trying to keep things safe, to me, I know that maybe it's different, but well, it is different. I think that this is the time that you would want to, if anything, which I'm not suggesting we do at all, but if anything, this would be the time you'd give a bonus. It wouldn't be the time you'd say, oh, sorry, we know you worked, twice as much time, but, we're going to cut to zero. I'd be surprised if we did that. And I think I heard Mr. Carruthers say it would take considerable time. And I think that time could be better spent. So I still don't support the motion, but I do understand the idea.
Thank you very much. I have Director Wilson, Stone, then Smith. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, both Director Acton and Director Sebring bring up some very good points there, and I'm glad they did. But I have to point out that I believe in giving people rises. Of course I do, for good performance, and the staff have performed very well. But I have to point out that in all those cases, they've all been fully paid throughout this pandemic, and will continue to be fully paid. There are those out there who have, as Director Acton pointed out, in the private sector, who have lost everything. And you've only got to look at the local Facebook or social media pages, and you will see over and over again people advertising small items for $2 and $3 and $5 and $10, which they would normally take to the thrift stores, to the charity people, so that they can help others. They're now selling those themselves. And if this is not an indication that people are suffering out there because of COVID and with everything else, then I don't see what more of an indication you would need. In this particular case, I will support a rise, but it can't be of the limits. For instance, you take somebody on $200,000, you're going to get $4,000 a year extra. That's a lot of money. We have to do something about this. And ensure that it's fair, because there are other people out there who have nothing left and who have not been paid fully throughout those. But I do believe we should reward the staff, but not perhaps to the extent that we're talking about at the moment. I will support this motion.
Thank you very much. Director Stone, you are next.
Yeah, just some clarity that might help us move on from the conversation. Last year at year end, CPI for Victoria was 2.4%. Right now it's trending to be at around 1 or less than 1%. So if the senior exempt staff salary increases are based on the Victoria CPI, it is going to be much less than it was in previous years. And just to comment on overtime and things like that. And again, we can get into the discussion when the information comes back. But my understanding that, overtime is either paid or offered as time in lieu. So it's not like people are working overtime without compensation, but I'm happy to look at the numbers and see what's available. Looking at the CPI right now, it's been dropping by 0.2% per month. End of September, it was 1.2% on a 12-month rolling average. So it could be significantly less than 1% by year end. So we'll look at the numbers when they come forward, and then we can look at the CPIs and see where we're at. Thanks.
I have Director Smith, hopefully to close, and we'll question.
I just wanted to clarify to Director Sebring that when I was indicating that the electoral areas, it was only budget 279 that is an electoral area. And that's where I was talking about at that time, because we were looking for breakdowns when it came to the parks and trails and the staffing funding at that in that budget. I support a conversation. I think this is a really important time for us to have this conversation. As Director Acton has pointed out, we do in our communities have many people struggling, and I think this is a really good way to go. And if we aren't having this conversation, then our communities are going to wonder why we're not having this conversation. So I support this.
Are you ready for the question, fellow directors? Call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Those opposed, if any? I see Director Marsh is opposed. Could you verbalize Director Yanni Denaldo? Yea or nay? I don't think I have her, but we have Director Marsh as a negative. That motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R3 is a report from the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer regarding 2021 supplemental budget requests. And again, this report is for information.
Okay. And who's taking this one?
If I can, Mr. Chair.
Please do.
Thank you again. So this is our annual supplemental request that has been vetted by the senior management team. So staff have looked across the organization at any areas where supplemental requests are deemed necessary. As in past years, we've ranked them in terms of priority, and we've also taken a risk-based approach to evaluating those supplementals that have come forward. In each one of your committee meetings, the directors and the committees will have an opportunity to review these requests in detail and determine whether they wish to approve them or not. In summary, as you're looking at the report, if all of the top tier 1 supplementals were approved by the board, there would be a total of a 0.36% increase. And if they chose to approve all of the tier 2 supplementals, would be a further 1.21%. So combined, the supplemental requests total 0.57% increase in requisition. As you'll notice, many of the supplemental requests have been funded through alternative means, whether by transfer from reserves, borrowing, those sorts of things. So it is a relatively small increase relative to the rest of the budget. However, I believe the committees are going to want to have a detailed examination of all of these requests, and I look forward to that conversation.
Excellent. So brought forward just for information at this time with further discussion at the appropriate committees. If I understood that right. Any input from directors? Director Sebring, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to say, Mr. Carruthers, that in a 0 year, and this isn't criticism, it's just my gut. I looked at it and went 45 supplemental requests when the board has said 0. Wow. That's not 0. But I understand also that you're trying to fund it with alternative sources and whatever. But I fear that the perception in community is going to be the beast has to continue to grow. And right now, I don't think that's a message we want to be sending. So I'm just giving you a heads up that I'm going to be going through these supplementals with a fine-tooth comb when they come up, because some of this is about need. I understand that. Some of it's also about public perception, and that's a reality that we in the governance chair are facing right now. So just to let you know. Thank you.
Your comment. Thank you. Director Marsh.
Yeah, I understand Director Sebring's thoughts about public perception, but I also think it's important that the public's perception has the whole story, and that we don't just turn something down so that the public perception might be negative. That we look very carefully at the supplemental, which I have every confidence in Mr. Carruthers and his staff, was difficult for them to do given the direction they were given by the board. And so I think it's premature and actually against the charter to have made up your mind before we hear the rationale. And I look forward to hearing the rationale. And I'm sure that there is really good rationale for everything. Whether the board feels it's affordable or not, well, that remains to be seen, and we'll find that out in a few weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have Director Stone first.
Thank you. Just to frame the issue, a few years ago or a couple of years ago, we got a report comparing the CBRD to other regional districts in terms of tax growth over a period of time. I just want to highlight that in Schedule C of the budget since 2014, the overall tax requisition has increased by almost 50%. So it's gone from 30,691,000 to 43,600,000. So I appreciate that these are many of these are services that we've taken to our electors, like affordable housing and drinking water, but 50% increase over 6 years when we're worried about affordability for folks is really hard to defend over a longer term like that. And it's been a steady munch away of 5, 4, 6, 5, 7, 5. But when you compound that over a 7-year period, this will be the 7th budget, or 6th for me, because I joined the board late, much like Mr. Day sounds like he's going to from Lake Cowichan. But we just have to be mindful of that. I'm very thoughtful about how we spend our money, and I don't think we've made bad investments over the years. But in a year like we're facing, tracking on a 7th budget to almost a 50% increase in 7 years is pretty difficult.
Thank you, Director Stone. I have Director Sebring and then Wilson.
I would only say, with respect to making up our mind, the only thing I've made up my mind to do is to go through these supplementals with a fine-tooth comb. I'm not saying they have to be accepted or rejected. I'm just saying that with this many in this budget year, it's going to precipitate some close examination. That's all. Thank you.
And I think we'll all come with that mindset that we're going to look at these for the merits that are presented and not going forward already making up our mind. Did I see your hand, Director Morrison? Okay, I'll put you on the list, and then I have Director Salmon on my list, but first I'll go to Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am incredibly happy that Director Stone has just brought up the fact that the amount of taxes in this area has gone up by that amount. And the reason I'm being is because a year ago I made up my own spreadsheet. I didn't need a 50-page report to tell me what was going on. The spreadsheet is one sheet only, and it shows exactly what's happened. And it basically confirms exactly what Director Stone has said. Anybody wants to see that, I'm more than happy to send it to you. And it has been checked by some people who know what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wilson. Director Morrison, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, hearing all the discussion today, and I know this is an information-only report, and I guess what I would ask all of us to do in the consideration of this, like when we hear surprised that there's this many supplementals coming forward, I just refer back to our very last board meeting when we passed the corporate strategic plan. And I think in there was something in the neighborhood of 30 plus action items that we told the organization to pursue on our behalf. So to get a list of those things that we have before us is the staff saying, well, we're trying to meet the marching orders that our elected officials have given us in our corporate strategic plan. And I think that if we were to sharpen our focus even more and say, you know, we've got a couple of years left in this term, and there are some key priorities, whether it be the regional rec or the HOCP or a few key priorities that we see as our priorities, then this list could be a lot shorter and have a lot less budgetary impact. So maybe that's a direction that we can go. Instead of trying to do a whole bunch of different things, we can sharpen our focus and get to the things that we really as a group want to see done. And that would make for a lot shorter list of supplemental items. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Morrison. I have Director Salmon, then Director Stone. Anyone else while I'm looking? Director Salmon, please.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, this list, I'm sure there's good reasons for many of them. But my question is, do we have another list that, like, do we look at every function? Or some of them would decline? It would be nice just to see what's the offsetting list. I know electoral area services, I believe, is declining, but is there a list of others that have been looked at and savings found, or things that resulted in decreases?
Well, if I can, Mr. Chair, many of the budgets saw decreases, reductions in terms of maintaining the 0% that the mandate that the board had given us, and other than those areas where you either saw a pre-approved exceedance of the 0% or the 8 business cases that are coming forward to you for consideration, all of the departments have met their 0% increase in their operational budgets. These supplemental requests are requests for projects or initiatives that were deemed, and as you'll note in the report, we broke them into categories. One is projects that address the strategic plan that the board has adopted. The other major category is asset management, and our assets require management, ongoing management. We've been committed to our asset management program, and many of those projects reflect that. I think there were 5 other projects that fell outside those 2 categories. So staff were very careful in bringing these forward, and I appreciate the director's concerns about the number. We have a responsibility to bring those items forward to the board, and we certainly respect a good debate and the board's final decision on whether they deem those as appropriate projects to move forward with. And I also appreciate the issue of public perception. But we do continue to have an organization to operate, and millions of dollars in infrastructure that needs to be maintained. And those supplemental requests reflect that.
Mr. Crothers, a follow-up, Director Salmon?
Yeah, but would there not be at least a few of our 180 functions that actually come in below 0?
Overall, Ms. Soldera can speak to that, but I believe that we have some functions or some of our operating units that actually did come in below 0.
See, Mr. Keeber popped up for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in the package that Ms. Soldera presented to you, Schedule A shows you a list of all the functions that have changed, whether they're increased or decreased. So all those decreases are listed out there. Of the 178 functions, those that aren't listed are at 0. If there's any change from 2020 from last year, it's going to be listed on there. So you'll see some changes some have decreased, some have increased. Overall, I think that the increase to the 2 transit functions and solid waste is over $1 million. However, all those other functions that have decreased have brought that down to about 700,000. So it's helped decrease that, reduce that increase as it is. But if you're looking for a specific list, it's on Schedule A.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have Ms. Soldera to add to that.
Just additionally, for this year, in the PowerPoint presentation, there was some comparison of individual services by regional electoral area. The full schedule of which areas participate in which service along with their 2020 requisition and their proposed 2021 requisition, is available on the 2021 budget website for the directors to view as well. But as Mr. Keeper said, the detailed breakdown of which functions had a decrease is contained in Schedule A.
Thank you very much. I have Director Stone and then Director Marsh. You're okay, Director Stone? Okay, Director Marsh?
Yes, I just had a question through you, Mr. Chair, to whoever would be the appropriate person. But I know from senior government, we received a considerable amount of money that is meant to help us with shortfalls because of COVID. So has that been considered in the budgets that you're doing, or is that something you're waiting for direction from the board for?
I could speak to that, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. That letter is on the board's agenda, advising that the CBRDs received $903,000 in COVID restart funding from the province. There'll be subsequent reports coming to the board with respect to recommendations for how those funds could be allocated. There's a number of criteria available to the board for those funds to be used, and we'll be assisting the board with some recommendations in that regard. Short answer, no, it has not been included in this current budget.
$1 million to allocate.
In specific items as directed by the letter, yes. And they'll come back to the board today in that letter, I believe, just for information, and then we can move.
That's correct.
As
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Anyone else while I'm here? And that was, Director Nicholson, please.
Thank you. I just have a comment, and it's this ongoing frustration about the way we are required to budget each individual service function. It does not allow you. It would take a lot of time, and we would have to plan in advance to run a process where you actually went through and looked at all the service functions individually and decided how well they fit your strategic plan, and so that you could decide where you could go back to the community with recommendations on services that we may need to shift. And I think at some point we're going to need to do that because things change over time. Many of these services were established a long time ago. Priorities do, and there's coming something very difficult to this conversation in the middle of a term because I don't believe we have time in this term to do that. But in actual fact, what we need to do is to do a comprehensive review of all the service functions in light of strategic priorities and issues that are coming at us. And I think that's the frustration I hear here because it's to anything more than just zero the service functions. Clearly, we need to start moving away from and putting more money into other things. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wilson, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Director Nicholson has actually just said what I was going to bring forward. Let's start looking at the holy grail of all these service things and start paring them out. Let's have a service review and get rid of some of the stuff that's been there for years and really doesn't do anything anymore.
I thought we were going to move on, but I see Director Smith, please.
Yeah, I agree with looking at some of these functions that we have because, first of all, you end up with the allocation for the government for the CVRD at 4.5%, and then when the province collects the tax, it's 5.25%. So it's almost costing the taxpayer 10% to actually participate within some of the functions of some of these historical societies and different ones that we have. So maybe this isn't the direction that maybe the communities no longer want to participate. Anyhow, just a comment on the additional cost of every function.
Appreciate that, and that is the director's prerogative to bring forward those options for service reviews. I've been involved in a couple in my time. But if that's your liking, then certainly that's totally up to you. Do I have further speakers? Okay, moving on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's no unfinished business or new business, so that brings us to question period. And there are no submissions in the inbox for question period. No closed session, so motion to adjourn.
Okay, moved and seconded. I was going to suggest we wait 5 minutes for any questions to come in, but that's fine. It's been moved and seconded for adjournment. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, Director.
Well done, Chair McGonigal.
Yeah, well done, Tim.
Thank you.